Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beat the Big Guys. I'm Sandy Rosenthal, your host. And today, my guest is from the great state of Ohio, Akron, Ohio, and his name is James Rauh. Hello, James.
Hello, how are you today?
I'm great, thank you. It's a beautiful day here in New Orleans, and I really look forward to having our conversation because it's a really, really important one. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and tell our guests a little bit about you before we get started.
Yes, and thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. So welcome. Should I call you James or Jim?
Jim?
Jim, okay. Jim Rauh is the founder of Families Against Fentanyl, a nonprofit organization he founded following the tragic death of his son Tom from fentanyl poisoning in 2015. A chemist by trade, Mr. Rauh is an expert on the extreme potency of illicit fentanyl, knowledge that has propelled him to leading a national bipartisan movement to have illicit fentanyl declared a weapon of mass destruction. That is a tall order, and it's very brave of you to take this on. And first, let me thank you so much for your hard work, and I'm so very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, Jim, if you could take a few minutes and tell our guests about your work with Families Against Fentanyl and tell us a little bit more of this very massive goal that you have in front of you.
Well, thank you so much. My son Tom was poisoned by acetylfentanyl in 2015 that was sent directly through the mail from a Chinese manufacturer to a drug dealer in Akron, Ohio, who gave it to my son and to another victim. They had never heard of fentanyl. There was no knowledge of fentanyl back then. It was a white powder. They assumed that they were going to be doing heroin. Tom did a dose that would have killed hundreds of people with the lethality of it. It was a straight acetylfentanyl, which is a analog of fentanyl that's far more powerful than regular fentanyl. The great work of the Akron Police Department, the DEA, and the Justice Department, they traced this dose all the way back to the Zhang drug trafficking organization in China, who was mass producing this material. In 2018, I was alerted that Jeff Sessions was on TV reading an indictment regarding my son Tom for the Zhang drug trafficking organization in China that they were prosecuting for his death. And in that indictment, it said that the Zhangs were capable of making 16 metric tons a month of fentanyl and were distributing that much throughout the world. We sent an emissary over to China to prosecute the Zhangs for this crime. That included the Justice Department and the DEA. They put their case on for several days in front of the Ministry of Justice in China. And after 15 minutes of deliberation, the Zhangs were set free and their contingent was sent home without any conviction whatsoever. Subsequently, Bob Anderson from 60 Minutes, in doing research for his segment, confronted the Zhangs in the marketplace in China and said to Dr. Zhang, when he confronted him, "What do you say to the parents of the children that you're murdering in the United States?" And at that time, Bob Anderson was accosted by the Chinese secret police. His visa was removed and he was taken to the airport and deported from China. He came back, and then they had the subsequent television broadcast of 60 Minutes. After that indictment and knowing all of this information, I have spent a fair amount of time in Hong Kong and then into the Shenzhen and then further into China, from Hainan Island all the way across to Macau and the territories in between in southern China. And I understood that the immense control that the government has over their people and their society. If the Zhangs had sold 1 gram of this material to their own countrymen, they would have been publicly executed, and that's a fact. So they were allowed to continue operation. And as of now, according to my information, the Zhangs are operating in a little north of Mexico City, mass producing fentanyl in sophisticated reactors, and they're continuing to poison the United States. We formed Families Against Fentanyl in order to cut off the supply of this deadly chemical. My background is in polymer science, and I understood that this material was derived from petrochemicals, and there was no limit to the amount that could be made. There's no limit to the amount of analogs that can be produced from it. And it can be, and it only takes a very, very, very simple reaction that can be done in a 55-gallon barrel with 2 buckets and a paddle to stir it up. It is so incredibly deadly, so incredibly easy to transport that after seeing the death of my son, the growth of this material, and that indictment, I took on the task of having fentanyl declared a weapon of mass destruction in order to enable the full force of the government to shut off the supply of this material. You know, there's several other materials that are commonly used that are weapons of mass destruction: Botox, chlorine gas, phosgene gas, and many, many, many chemicals in industrial uses are weapon of mass destruction. Cyanide being one of them, which was used to poison lots and lots of people in World War II. That's a weapon of mass destruction. If they were putting cyanide in people's illicit drugs, they would be going crazy because it would be directly murder. But this is directly murder, and it's following China's retribution for the Opium Wars. President Xi brought up the Opium Wars in the 100th anniversary in the second paragraph of his speech. Speaking about retribution for the Opium Wars, they feel that they're entitled to do this because it's tit for tat, and it's a way to bring down a country from the inside rather than having a direct confrontation. And when you have no change of government, you can.
Could you explain a little bit? I'm familiar with the OxyContin and what happened there, but some of our listeners may not. So can you elaborate a little bit on that retribution, please?
On retribution, historically, they feel that, you know, they should be taking over Taiwan, and they feel that we brought them down from being the #1 world power through the Opium Wars, which we did along with England. It was primarily England, and it got so bad that that's how they came up with the term "all the tea in China," because they were trading opium for Chinese tea, and their demand for tea was so high, and they got into a argument about that, and then they started shipping in opium like crazy to the ports of Shanghai and all up and down the Chinese coast, and they had their opium dens, and then the Chinese went in and killed the addicts, forced all the material out, expelled the British, and in the war, and did their best to recover from their own opium war. And now they feel, since we had done that to them, brought them down, they went from being the #1 power in the world to the 3rd largest power in the world within a very short period of time.
And thank you for explaining that. And you educated me too. I wasn't as familiar with that, and I thought you were talking about OxyContin. You were talking about opium. Big difference.
The Opium Wars.
Opium
in China, and so here they are. They're doing this. It's killing Americans at the rate that Americans were being killed in World War II. They don't even have to fire a shot, and we pay them billions of dollars and billions of dollars to do it. And it's costing the U.S. trillions of dollars in lost productivity and response. They estimated, the Council for Combating Synthetic Opioids estimated $1.5 trillion a year in lost productivity. But that's not even a small percentage of what it's doing to us. This is causing an amazing amount of grief and destruction in these family units. because it's entering through this illicit drug supply. So it's infecting the people who have SUD. So you have all this stigma that's protecting the ability to distribute it, because people think, oh, you have a problem, it's your own fault. So they permit it. It's your fault. You shouldn't be playing with drugs. You should know better. And so it goes to this compulsion versus free will thing. So how you have too much compulsion over your free will, you're weak. Nobody knows what it's like, unless you're on a diet or you are, whatever other human compulsions are prevalent in your life. Everybody fights their own willpower battles. And in this case, addiction overtakes your amygdala response, and you have no control over yourself, and you begin to actually get physically sick for the material. And it's one terrible, terrible disease. So they've hacked this mechanism, and they're producing ANPP precursor from aniline, which is directly made from petrochemicals. And there's no other use for ANPP other than fentanyl that I can find. So they're mass producing this ANPP, and they're shipping it down to Mexico, where they're reacting that with just a small amount of other chemicals, usually some type of chlorine or other oxidizer, and then they're making fentanyl. And they're able to make this in mass quantities and ship it to the United States and do this horrible damage to our families, our friends, and the government and the economy. And it's
right here. Is it all right if I point something
Yes.
out to that supports what you're saying? I mean, it's true, everybody, what Jim is saying. Fentanyl is here. It's right here in our own neighborhoods. It's here now. Just right here in New Orleans, in a suburb of New Orleans, just 2 days ago, a mom was arrested. She was arrested because her little 1-year-old died with enough fentanyl in his little tiny body to kill an adult. When the police arrived, there was also cocaine and heroin in the room, and there was also fentanyl in the mother's body. And she was arrested, the mother, for second-degree murder. So, Jim, with your knowledge of this huge problem, what is your comment on this terrible incident here in New Orleans?
What a terrible tragedy for the mother, the people involved, the baby. All of it's just terribly horrible. When you're using and you're losing, and you continually fall deeper and deeper into it, you necessarily get sloppy. You can barely function physically. The way that you look at things and everything else, you're full of this drug that's dulling all of your senses, your reaction time, your thinking process, everything, and put you in a state of satisfaction that you could be in living hell and you think everything's okay because you've got your dope inside of you, and it makes everything okay. Next thing you know, you make a mistake about this, you leave this laying there, you pass out for a little bit or nod off, or you're doing something else. Your baby crawls over and picks up this foil and starts playing with it, and it's over. That takes so little, so very, very little. And the smaller you are, and if you have no built-in tolerance, some of these people can take a dose that would kill somebody immediately who doesn't have a tolerance. You build a tolerance for the use of it. And I just heard a report that a baby had died from the fentanyl in its mother's milk. Now I don't know how that gets through there, but I'm seeing this exploding. They're seizing more than all the people in the country could possibly take by many, many times over. So they're saying they seized enough to kill everybody in the United States, I think 3, 4, 5 times over this year. But they're only catching 10% of what's coming in, according to the DEA. So it's indicative of stockpiling, and it's been this way for a while. It appears that there's more of the material here than it could be consumed by possibly all of us. And I'm trying to get to the bottom of this mathematical usage versus import, and it appears that it's been stockpiled and being stockpiled in greater and greater amounts. That is extremely frightening to me because it's going to fall into the hands of somebody that knows how to disperse it.
This,
And right now
I'm
it's going through,
terrified.
right now
I'm
it's,
going to today. I've made up my mind. I'm going to make sure that everyone in town who has read this story about this little baby knows about my conversation with you, because I promise you, people are going, "What's fentanyl?" There are a lot of people still don't know about it. We should, but we don't.
this is being appears to be being stockpiled in the United States, and this distribution of this material will go to dispersion, no matter what. That's
Dispersion.
to dispersion. It's going to go from distribution to dispersion, and it's happening now. You can find fentanyl metabolite in water systems in every city. So they check the water at the sewage plant. You can find fentanyl in the excrement. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
That's how
Mm-hmm.
much fentanyl is out there.
That's how much.
So this is getting into the environment. So as it spreads out, it gets handled. You put more energy in it. It goes from distribution to dispersion. And this dispersion can be set off by somebody with bad intent for mass casualty events in the most rudimentary way. If this were put in the pressure cooker bomb in Boston, it would have devastated the whole city. Put this much material up into the air and blow it up. It would have caused the casualties to be exponentially more.
And meanwhile, the American public is just not aware.
I went to China and Hong Kong before anything happened to my family whatsoever. I traveled there on business.
Oh, I see.
As a younger man.
I see.
Okay. I had global wide trading in as my office in Hong Kong, and I sold plastic and rubber materials to the market in southern China and Shenzhen. And that's how I got to know the workings of the Chinese people. I love the Chinese people. I had a tremendous time there, and they are so suppressed. Every house has a shrine to their ancestors that I went into, and they venerate their ancestors. And I asked them, where are they? They said, can they still hear you? They said, yes, of course. We talked to them. They have a heaven. They believe in heaven. They believe in a religion, but the government suppresses 100% of that. I was on 60 Minutes in 2018, and I think that I would not be too
allowed.
comfortable there at this time, since I'm more or less indicting the Chinese government.
So you couldn't go to China, but how did you? I guess you're saying it's a combination of your past experience in China that helped you formulate, how you would, your path to doing something about this crisis because of your past experience.
Yes, because of my past experience in China and knowing how the government operates, and my background in chemistry and rubber and plastics, making dispersions in rubber and plastics and getting reactions from them. We vulcanize rubber in order to set off a reaction, in order to cure it. That's how you make tires or different things. And I do the different types of those types of reactions, and I could see what could happen with this if it was mishandled, and it's starting to come true. And just because there's so incredibly high amount of the material coming here, so I'm afraid for our national security. There are terrorists crossing the border. There are factions of groups here that have very strong beliefs about each other, whether they're racial or whether they're political or whether they're monetary or whatever grievance that could be demonstrated. This material will come to the surface under what I consider percolation theory, because the more pressure that's exerted on the system, the more it leaks through the cracks, and you start seeing these nodes of death, and which we're starting to see.
So what is this? I mean, we're already at a critical point. It's already a huge crisis already. But what do you see in your mind? How could it get worse? And is there something else that you're also worried about?
I'm afraid it's already infiltrated the illicit drug supply. Okay. It will take next to nothing to infiltrate the food, air, or water supply.
Okay. That's where I was going with this. I mean, next it'll be in our coffee.
It can be anywhere in your potato
Anywhere.
chips. It goes into the salt machine in the
Salt.
potato chip factory, or if it goes anywhere, it can infiltrate anything. It's
Okay.
so easy to carry.
Mm-hmm.
It's not
And cheap
readily
to make
transferable. You
and
can carry it in
inexpensive to
your hand.
make.
All you have to do is add a little polar solvent to it, and it goes right through your skin.
Wow.
This thing
Wow.
becomes terrible with various
Well,
chemicals and various things. And I'm
well,
not
you've
going to.
succeeded in.
I'm not going to
I'm
elaborate.
sold. You've succeeded in worrying me about it. Now I'm going to do whatever I can do because I'm very worried about it now. You also mentioned earlier, and this is to our listeners, fighting the big guys in their neighborhoods. Sometimes you're working with a situation where there's a stigma attached to the victims. There's in speaking just for my own challenges when I was fighting the Army Corps of Engineers, trying to get them to own up to their mistakes when they built the levees. But here in New Orleans, we, the people who live here, were stigmatized. You know, they called us stupid for living in New Orleans. They called us, not paying attention to what's going on with our levees. And we were, in many ways, the victims were blamed for what happened to us. Many people, I think the worst that happened is people who stayed because they didn't have a car, credit card, or travel experience. The people who stayed drowned. And the attitude was, well, they should have evacuated. So we were stigmatized. And that's one of the things that I had to deal with when I tried to, I was on my mission to get the Army Corps of Engineers to admit their mistakes. And so what I did is, rather than discuss the death count, which recently was reduced from 1,800 to 1,400, how they did that, I'm not sure. But rather than focus on the death count, what I did with my challenges was only talk about the damage and destruction, the loss of property and infrastructure. And I had to limit just because of the stigma. I'm not suggesting that for everything, but it is, dealing with stigma is something, is a very real thing. What can you add anything, Jim, on the issue of stigma?
Stigma enables this.
Mm.
It's the total enabler of all this. It makes you turn a blind eye to whatever's happening. You're a bad parent because you didn't raise your kid right. And you feel that. Oh my God. And so you're depressed for the rest of your life. I was a shitty father. I did something wrong. You always feel like, what I do, how did my kid get into this situation? Why did I let this happen? What did I do wrong? And you feel guilty about, every time you've made some move that could have been wrong. And it's crushing. So there's that stigma. I've been a bad parent. The kid did it to himself. There's that stigma. Hey, well, how do you have this compulsion? Why didn't you have more willpower? You should have known better than me taking anything in the first place. That enables us to creep into society with all this blame. Everybody can turn a blind eye and not take responsibility for each other because they see it as your weakness, not as this poisoning that's going on. And all of us have our weaknesses that we confront day to day. Different things that we want to accomplish, or different ways we want to be. We can all be better people. And
Absolutely.
that starts with the love and care of the helpless and the endangered. And people who have substance use disorder are endangered.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and yes. So, and Jim, I just remembered what I was trying to say right when this episode began. You have something that not many people have in your fight to beat the big guys. You have something called moral authority. And the death of your son, that gives you moral authority, that the first moral authority. Not everybody uses their moral authority. Way too many people just collapse in post-traumatic stress trauma. Most people, but you are using what happened and letting it energize you rather than pull you down. Rather than letting it consume you. You're letting it consume you in a good way. It's that moral authority. And I just want to say, thank you, Jim, for for all your energy and moral authority in bringing this crisis to the attention of the American people. Jim, what is your, if you could, on an elevator with someone for 45 seconds, what's your elevator speech on what your goal is, please?
Fentanyl needs to be declared a weapon of mass destruction by the United States government in order to force accountability and responsibility. That right now they're evading their duties in order to allow their policy to play out. This is endangering the national security of the country, and it's allowing this poison to come in at such a record amount that it threatens the lives of all of us. We need to stop this and see it for what it is and put an end to it.
What can I do, a citizen of this country? How can I help?
Your voice matters. And when you contact politicians, when you discuss it with your friends, first of all, I want to raise the awareness amongst people that this threat is out there, and they need to protect themselves. They need to protect their schools, their enclosed environments. Everything has to be looked at in a different light where people gather from now on. We want people to understand that we're being set up. I want the differences in our tensions between various groups to be alleviated by them confronting each other in peaceful means in order to resolve their problems. I'm truly afraid that some foreign entity or some other person will come into the country, use this material for a mass casualty event, and place a false flag on some other group or blame another ancillary group so they can start a fight between various polarizing groups that'll send this thing spiraling out of control. And I'm truly believe that we have the ability to stop this in at least the most extreme part of what I fear.
We absolutely do have the power to stop it. There's no question about that. So, Jim, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners as they work on beating the big guys in their own communities?
First of all, if you've suffered something like this, you're not to blame. You know, there's so many things that happen in life, and experimentation and taking risk is always thought of as, you know, necessary. You take risk in order to make money in business. You take risk in order to, you know, exercise. You take risk in order to do sports. You're always placing yourself at risk. You're at risk when you get in the car. You already know there's a risk that as soon as you get in there, there's a statistic. Somebody might just ram right into you. This risk is beyond our ability to manage. It's not a risk that we can go on, and this showing up in these babies and children shows us the prevalence of what's happening in this most horrible way. And we have got to wake up before this stuff blows up in our face.
Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. And if any of our listeners would like to find out more about Families Against Fentanyl.
Yes.
Did I say that right?
Yes.
Families Against Fentanyl. What would you suggest they do?
Go to our website, sign our petition, get in touch with your local community. We need education in schools. We need schools to be protected. This is starting to infiltrate into schools more and more all the time. There's been children who have died in the school. There are children who are getting Narcan in the schools. We need to make sure that this doesn't happen in any enclosed environment. We need to step up our security.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you for joining me, and thank you all, the listeners, for joining me as well. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to like, subscribe, and review this podcast on all of your favorite platforms. And remember, no matter who you are, you too can beat the big guys.